Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Talia Carner, who is a historical fiction author. And Talia, for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write?
I write the books I would like to read. Or another way, I call it intelligent women's fiction. Or on a bookshelf, it will be social issues in fiction or historical fiction. Very often they cross paths because you have a subject that had been a social issue, like my last novel, The Third Daughter, was about um, it's about sex trafficking, but it took place in Argentina in the beginning of last century. So it's both historical and definitely a social issue. And this Boy with a Star Tattoo, which is what we're going to talk about today, is mostly historical, but quite interesting because I don't set up to write about something that no one has ever written about. But I guess my brain works in a way that I end up being interested in off the track kind of subjects, and I end up writing about subjects that have not been covered before. And The Boy with the Star Tattoo is definitely such a book.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Okay, this novel takes place in France, and it has two timelines, 1946 and 1968-69. What makes it unique, it's both subjects have to do with Israel, but they take place in France. The story is about a young woman who is an assistant to a naval officer, Israeli naval officer, stationed in Cherbourg, France, and that's in the late 1960s, who is obsessed with trying to figure out where he had come from, where in 1946 he had been found as an orphan post-World War II and was brought to Israel. And that was a movement called Youth Aliyah, where agents from Israel roamed the countryside all over Europe. My story focuses on France, in search of Jewish orphans that nobody came back to claim. And she follows, in my book, she follows a trail of breadcrumbs across France in trying to figure out his past. And that's what the book is, because she discovered on a picnic on the beach that he had a Jewish star at the bottom of his foot. And she says somebody knows something about it. And he refuses to cooperate. He has this has to do with Israeli defense naval operation that he was focusing on, and he doesn't want to deal with the past. He has a lot in the future of Israel and Israel's defense, as it was true for the 1960s. And she is a yenta, meaning a busybody who cannot leave things alone. She has a motivation of why she's so obsessed with it, but that's what the book is about.
Aha. So, what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
Many of my readers tell me that the greatest satisfaction they have when they end the book and close it, they say they learned something.
Hmm.
There's every single one of my books, and this one is my sixth novel. People learn things. And I think that that's always interesting. There are a lot of books that are very well written, boy meets girl in a variety of ways, or domestic relationships. There are many. I mean, They're very well written. They take the reader on very interesting psychological journeys. But in terms of learning something new, going to a new place, a new subject, a new era, a new culture, that is what makes, for me, an interesting book to read and to write, and to devote the years that it takes me to write each book.
It takes you years to write it. How much of that is researching it?
It's very often it comes and goes. It varies. Each book is a different story, but if I say in general, it's 5 years.
5 years to write a book.
Yes,
Oh,
but it's
okay.
not always full time. It has to, I'm on a book tour now for the Boy with a Star Tattoo.
Mhm.
And so I've started another novel. I hadn't opened that manuscript in about 4 months. I will not, I don't know, maybe I'll find some time this summer. And sometimes next year I'll have to travel to this country I've never been to, where that story takes place. So I don't know how long that will take me.
Okay. So, what was the actual inspiration for the boy with the star tattoo?
A road sign. A road sign.
Hmm.
My husband and I were driving in Normandy, France, and I saw the sign to Cherbourg. We didn't stop because a lot of very interesting places in Normandy. But as we drove on, I remembered several things. First of all, you remember the film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And if you don't remember the film, you would recognize the music. With Catherine Deneuve, it was an iconic film years ago in the 1960s. So I remember that, but I remembered the 1969 Israeli naval action in Cherbourg. That I knew a lot about that story, not nearly as much as I was soon to discover, but I definitely knew there had been 5 boats that the French arms embargo prohibited, banned from leaving, and Israeli Navy did plan and stole its own boats because Israel had paid, and the design was Israeli with German and Italian influences and input, and built in a private shipyard, was paid for by Israel, had been done by confirmed by the French government. Every such program, the Ministry of Acquisition in France had to approve. And then the arms embargo said, oh, no, you cannot take your own boats. So the Israeli Navy did that, I remembered. And I wasn't going to touch it. It wasn't something I write about, right? I don't write naval warfare. So I left it alone, but a few months later, I looked into it and found a book that had been written in the recent years about that operation, that a lot of it had been kept under wraps since for at least 35, 40 years, until that particular journalist investigated and the Navy opened the archives. So I read the book and I said, okay. And then I was in Israel in 2017, it's July, and I was talking to a friend who is an Israeli journalist, and I said to her, one day I'm going to look into the boats of Cherbourg. Everybody above a certain age knows exactly what it is. So, and that's it. That's all I said. A few hours later, she calls me and she says, Admiral Hadar Kimchi is expecting your call. And I started screaming because I couldn't believe it. He's a hero. I didn't even know he was alive. And I knew his name only because I'd read that book a few months prior. Otherwise, turns out his name had been kept. He had been one of the captains of one of the 5 boats, but it was not known. There was actually another guy, very loud, with a big mustache, who drank a lot, who appeared to be the spokesperson when the boats arrived. When we look at photographs, he has all the microphones in front of his face. So people, and purposely, the Navy did not make Hadar Kimchi, did not let know that Hadar Kimchi was the brain and the commander. But now I knew. And well, he was 89 years old, but you and I speak now, he's 95, still alive, a wonderful man. And my finger shook when I dialed his number the next morning. I was in Tel Aviv. He says, hop on the train and come to Haifa. I'll meet you on the other side. Like, I didn't even, I was in a hotel. I didn't have a notebook. So I took one of those little, little pads from the hotel, a piece you have by the phone. I didn't even know what questions to ask him. I ended up interviewing him at least twice formally, and then we developed a very nice relationship. And the following year, he came to my birthday party. Another time, he took me to the museum to see one of those boats so we could explain the mechanics of things that obviously my readers were not going to be interested in. So anyway, by the end of the second meeting, he opened his flip phone and had me look up names and phone number of some specific people. He connected me because he was the admiral. Now he connected me with 14 other people who had been a part of this operation, or some of them I was interested in family members. So he gave me some, particularly one woman who had been a young wife, 40, that's now, but that time it's 47 years after the event. So she had been a young bride at the time she had first arrived in Cherbourg, but she appeared prominently in that book that I read by Abraham Rabinowitz, who documented all of this. So I ended up, this is an example, I was writing The Third Daughter, and I didn't have time for that, but I realized that all of these names I had were of people most of them, between the age of 89 and 98. And I couldn't tell them, wait a couple of years until I have time for you. So I ended up spending that summer interviewing them, and from them I got additional contacts, and then I found on the internet I've even found groups of seamen. I only had access to the officers and families, people in the leadership, but turns out this, for the seamen, this had been the biggest event of their lives, and they still had ongoing conversations in chat groups. So by the end of the summer of 2017, I realized I have a lot of material about something I have absolutely no use for. And what I need is a human story, the kind of stuff I write about. And the only way I can get it is if I go to Cherbourg, and this time not just pass by the road sign, but settle in town, and the story will find me. And that's exactly what happened. By my third day in Cherbourg, I saw her, Sharon Blumenthal. Oh my God, who's Sharon Blumenthal? In my novel, Jerusalem Maiden, that had been published, this is really a crummy copy here, and that had been published several years prior in 2011, in the epilogue, the very end, appears the granddaughter of my protagonist. the entire story takes 45 years prior, so they're not related. But the protagonist, the granddaughter, Sharon, appears in 1968 in Paris, exactly where I need her. I mean, that's a complete coincidence. I need a protagonist, a young, feisty person who's about 20 years old. She just came out of, finished her IDF service. She had been an intelligence analyst. She's very smart. That's already shown in that epilogue. I know a lot about her family. I know other things. And the important part that I knew that was not in there, because when I write about a character, I have to know other things about her. What I knew was that I know her father was the son of my protagonist of Jerusalem Maiden. But he had married her mother, who was a newly arrived teenager, almost 17, arrived from Bayouth Aliyah, and nobody knew anything about her. She had arrived, I mean, she arrived at 17, married him at 18, had Sharon at 19, and both got killed 6 weeks later at the War of Independence in Israel, 1948. And Sharon, so I knew already that she was Youth Ali. That gave me the entry into a story that I've always wanted to tell, and that about the Jewish orphans. And from that point on, I'm sitting in Shabul, I have Sharon, and I have Sharon telling me that story, taking me through it. And there are a lot of things happened since, but that is how the story came about.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. So that that was kind of both the inspiration and the research. You kind of talked about both of that, both things.
That was one part. So I said I had more information about naval warfare than I needed, or specifically about this particular event that took place in 1968, 68, they began to prepare, and there were technical and strategic reasons to do that. But what was fascinating to me was the question of youth aliyah, because we know, those of your viewers who are members of Hadassah may have heard of Henrietta Sold, who had founded Hadassah in 1911, and then in 1939, decades later, took over the rescue of Jewish orphans at that time, starting just before the World War II broke, by getting children out of Germany to the Holy Land and Palestine, controlled by the British Mandate. And then soon after the war, and during the war and after, increasing it and getting those kids to Israel. So my question was, how do you find a Jewish orphan? And that took me a year and a half of research. How do you find a Jewish orphan? Did the agents knock on the door of every farmhouse and say, do you by any chance have a Jewish kid here that you've been taking care of several years? Let me take her across the Mediterranean to a country whose language she doesn't speak. And the people have just raised her for a few years. We say to the stranger at the door, sure. Made absolutely no sense. Yet we know by numbers that this is what happened. So I needed to understand, how did it happen? What was the mentality of these people who gave the children away? What was the mentality in France? I focused again on France. how did it happen? Why did it happen? It was very, very hard to find answers. And you have to read the book to get more of a sense of how it was done. And so that's when I realized that I needed to follow one of those agents. And that was particularly happened to be the late father of a friend of mine. I knew the man many times. I met him many, many times. I knew that he had done that. I read he has a memoir. In his memoir, it says, I went to Marseille and picked up Jewish orphans. And that is where what was the problem. In every account, there were absolutely not enough details. And unfortunately, he had been dead for at least 10 years by the time I got the idea that I need some more answers. And so were all of agents that I tried to find. I finally found one who gave me some very interesting answer on her deathbed, literally on her deathbed. I had to wait for weeks before her son said to me, today my mother can talk to you on the phone. He put a phone to her ear. But I read a lot of books. I interviewed people in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. I interviewed so many people at the Shoah Museum in Paris, and I read memoirs. The memoirs said I was reunited with my parents, or my uncle and aunt, or I was sent to an orphanage. What do you mean sent? Who sent you? Oh, I arrived in an orphanage. How do you arrive? If you're 12 years old, you don't go from one city to another so easily. There were a lot of questions. I found the answers, I think, and I wanted to take that exploration,
Mm,
and that's what I did here.
wow. So we have to read the book in order to get the answers to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of both emotions and also the various cases. I would say I didn't want it to be a Holocaust book. I didn't want to go into the history of the Jews during the Holocaust. We get a glimpse of it from a non-Jewish seamstress who is illiterate, almost illiterate, and she doesn't understand what happens to the Jews. So she asks some questions, but that kind of shows that nobody actually understood what was going on until much later when it was revealed. So I didn't want to get it. There are enough books. I wanted to see what happens after. How do you restart? It's more of that step next. And same thing is next for the boats. For the
Mhm.
future of Israel.
Okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Boy with the tattoo
The challenge turns out to be
star tattoo?
technical, and that is I have 3 point of view characters in different timelines, and I had to put those together, which I use color-coded cards chapter by chapter. But if I move them around, I put them on the floor of my office. And every time I moved a chapter around, there was the question of, does the reader already knows this from the other character, or should not have a hint, or should get a hint? Every time I moved one card around, it was so much editing to be done around it that it took me 1.5 years to come to the final structure that the book has now. It was very, very challenging. It's not just that it's 3 point of view, it's what does each character tells us as the story continues to move on. How much do we need to know? What is the point of tension? Because there's many things that we actually know, and yet, if it was a full suspense story, for example, we know who his mother was. We know, the reader. Sharon doesn't. So what if I reveal that already? What's the tension? And I had a discussion with a friend who's a top, I don't want to mention the name, top suspense writer. And he said, you're revealing too soon. So I said, the tension is, are they ever going to meet? Are they ever going to find out about each other? Are they going to find out that they don't know that the other one is alive or exists, whatever? So yes, there are other points of tension that are not necessarily, that Sharon doesn't yet know all of that, and she explores, but the reader has some ideas about what's going on, which is the reverse of some books that have tension based upon the author holding back information from the reader. And I only hold back if the character doesn't know it. Meaning, I don't like, I read which book it was not long ago. Yes, a very a bestseller. It was pretty good, but turns out at the end that the two characters were actually one. So when we are in a point of view of one character, she doesn't tell us that she's actually the other. I mean, she knows, we're in her head, and the author is hiding it from the reader. Not that it's hidden from the character. So that's what I don't like, playing with the reader. I'd rather have the reader go on a journey with me, on the journey of discovery, but the psychological suspense is what's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So was there one character that you loved or hated the most?
Actually, it was a secondary character. It was a real life character. His name is Felix Amiot. He shows up a bit later on in the book and becomes bigger towards the end. But he's a real character that I got to absolutely admire. He died in 1974. Anybody who ever read the biography of Coco Chanel comes across the name Felix Amiot. And you probably in your bookstore have quite a few biographies of Coco Chanel. When she tried to steal during World War II, the part of her Jewish partners, the Wertheimers, Paul and Pierre Wertheimers, and she lived in a Ritz hotel with a Nazi commander all throughout the war years. So she tried to steal, and it was found. She discovered that actually before they left, they had sold their part to their friend Felix Amiot. And she was furious. He managed that part of the business for all throughout the years and gave it back to them after the war. And they are still, the Wertheimer family still owns Chanel 5 and all of that. They're pretty modest about their riches. But Felix Amiot at the same time, well, actually, he was a genius. He built airplanes. By World War II, he owned half the aviation industry in France. So when the Nazis arrived, he cooperated. He built them airplanes, and he built them engines to the Nazis. So after the war, he would have been executed as a collaborator, except of what he did there, but he did other things, and I discovered it little by little. Like there's all kind of stories why but he was saved, but he was banned from the aviation industry, at which point he went to Cherbourg, where his parents had a home when he was young, and he opened a shipyard. And this is 1950. He made all kind of inventions. For example, refrigerated ships was his inventions. Many patents around that, until the Israelis arrived in the early 1960s, asking him to build them the boats, and there was nothing he would not do for these people. And I interviewed, for example, a girl, she had been a teenager of 14 when she arrived with her father, had been one of the officers in Cherbourg, the Israeli naval officers. Now, when I interviewed her, she was well into her 60s. And she said she gets into, they also, Amiot gave the Israelis 2 buildings for the families to live. So she walks into this apartment and her room, and it's all in pink and pink chenille, and it was so gorgeous. This is 1960s. Pink was big for girls. And when she eventually met him, he told her, yes, I heard that a teenage girl was coming. I asked the decorator that did my daughter's room to do the same.
Wow.
I mean, this man who built ships, he had a lot of things on his head rather than decorating a 14-year-old girl's bedroom. He was so attentive, and I heard so many stories about him that I had to reconcile this Nazi collaborator with the person I was hearing first-hand accounts of people. Luckily, I met his biographer, a young Frenchman, a professor at a university there in Normandy, who had written his PhD on Felix Amiot, and he shared with me the thesis and all of this history, and eventually he published it in a book. So the book is available all in French. If you haven't figured it out, I speak French. So Justin Le Carpentier became my source, and it helped me. He gave me a lot of information that put it together. So that was a character I totally fell in love with, and Sharon does too. Develops very nice relationship with him, with appreciation, from the suspicion to fondness. So that was one character. Another character, which actually steals the show, her name is Claudette. I mentioned in passing before, a almost illiterate French seamstress who's really very talented. And her story is extremely interesting and touching. And I could write a whole book just about her. Actually, I did. I had to cut a lot of chapters in order to fit, not to make her the main character of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Or it would have been, the book would have been 600 pages, doorstopper.
So, do you write do you outline your books, or do you write kind of a seat of your pants?
No, I wish I could. I tried. Now that I started another book, I said, okay, it's time to outline. There's no way. I have to go into a trance for every scene. I am there with my protagonist. I am completely like in a dream. I see the sights, I hear the sounds, I feel the weather on my skin. And most importantly is the emotions. In a dream, you feel it's very real. There's a little bit more logic during my trance than it is in a dream. But basically, I have to be there scene by scene. I can't even jump and say, okay, I will write that scene later. No, I have to write it. And before I continue on the next day or the next week, in this case, it's going to be months since I've touched the manuscript. I'm going to reread everything and go into a trance in every chapter as I re-edit before I can go forward. So it's not an efficient way of writing, but that's how the story comes to me.
Mm-hmm. So do the characters kind of tell you what's going to happen next?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's that.
that's what happens a lot. Yeah, you kind
Yes.
of follow them around, and they kind of just do their own thing.
I was just in Paris. I got back Saturday, and my apartment was right next to Jerusalem Made, and half of it takes place in Paris, 1924, during the avant-garde era. And there's a Saint-Sulpice church, which is very interesting, has a lot of significance in the book. And my apartment was not far. And as I was walking there, I was again in that moment when Esther, my protagonist, saw that particular column and what happened in that column. And there's, I don't want to go, but emotionally, I was so again with her that was amazing to me how emotional that was. And I would pass this church now almost every day, depending on the route I would take. And every time I'm Esther again. At that moment, as I pass and I look and I see she fell in love with this a man who's sculpted. They are in a Saint-Sulpice two columns after lightning destroyed the roof. One was reconstructed and one is not until today. Hundreds of years, there has only the stone sticking up, ready, waiting to be carved. And in my book, she sees her sculptor carving them, the man that she had been dreaming of. And I see Pierre again it's just amazing. Yeah, it never leaves me.
So, what can we expect from you in the near future?
Please read my previous books because it takes me years to write my next, and I still have to travel and to do so much research. And again, during the process of strengthening each scene, I also strengthen the prose and makes it, more, add the descriptions and take off too much. There's a lot that goes into that. And that is why I don't have a contract. My publisher is HarperCollins. The contract says they have a right of first refusal, which means every book I write, my agent has to present to them first. So far, they buy every one. But I don't want to have a contract that tells me I have to write about a specific topic and deliver at a specific time. And I am not ready to talk about the very interesting social issue of my next book, which again came to me. I cannot even begin to tell you. It would be very fascinating when I tell that how it came to me. But it's a subject I'm researching in my free time. And I have to travel to a country I've never been to, and actually I try to stay away. And it came to me as I don't know where. All of a sudden, I'm that character in working in this factory in this country, and only then I looked on the internet and found that country, that part of the country, has that kind of industry. I don't understand how it came to me. but it spooks me a bit. But I'm not that kind of a person who, I don't think I channel, but sometimes I think I do.
So you put yourself as that character. You kind of bring yourself into the character.
Yeah, but it's not a first person. It's always a third person. And
Ah,
it could be either present or past. Most time I write what's called closed third person, meaning it's like you have the camera right here, so you can see what the character sees. You are in their thought, and that's why I have the feeling and so on, but I keep it in a third person. And I don't think I've ever written a novel. No, none of my novels is in the first person.
hmm.
But I think this one I write, the new one, the number 7, in a present tense, while the others mostly are in a past tense.
It, is it a historical novel also?
No, it's contemporary. It's a very
Ah,
contemporary issue. Yeah.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So when I told my agent I'm writing this particular topic, she says, no, you are on the bookshelves at this bookstore under historical fiction. So I said, well, gonna go elsewhere. I don't write to the market, even though eventually it is, because as I said at the very beginning, I write what I would like to read. And that
Hmm.
if that captures me so much that I'm willing to spend now 3, 4, 5 years on it, then it should better be very interesting.
That's for sure. Okay, so now I have questions about being a writer, on being a writer. What is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
That first one is that trance to write, and then it comes out the creativity. I type, and what I do is actually I close my eyes and kind of let the story write, and then I have a lot of corrections to do. But so it's very satisfying. But the end of a few hours like that, oh yes, it's great. That's one. The other one, I love talking to my audience. I do a lot of in person. I have this week, I'm finishing for this book that came out less than 4 months ago. This week, my number 49 and 50 in person event in 5 months, 4 months. So I love that. And it will pick up again in September. So yes, I love that. The talking, presenting to audiences and share my writing and passion with them.
Mhm.
So on one hand, it's very isolating, and I love being just with my own head in this. You see my attic room here. Actually, I'm looking at a fantastic water view on the other side. So while this looks like a little attic office, it's magnificent, is what I'm looking at. And from being on my own for that long, all of a sudden I'm sharing my work with the world. So it's like two very opposite type of experiences.
Hmm. So, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome it?
Well, I know that for myself and most writers is breaking through with the first novel. First of all, getting an agent is as difficult as it is to write a book. My first agent answered my query number 221, and even that agent didn't sell the book. So it's not just landing an agent, it's the agent landing a contract. That is luckily that very, very difficult time is behind me. I would say that what's the next difficult for many authors is starting to look at the numbers of sales, which I don't do. I simply don't do. I don't know how many of my books. I get the checks, royalties, so I know, okay, it's doing well. But I don't know exact numbers, but for readers, and it's getting reviews, I guess. It's again, I always like and I asked for reviews, but my life is not completely, I mean, I'm not desperate. That's not the most difficult thing for me. So I can speak for some other writers, not others. You know, there's a pyramid, and on the top you have some very few known names that sell 70 million copies in 100 countries and so on. And there are very few. And then it gets different layers. And the bottom actually is the one, I mean, not fully the bottom, but it's a pyramid. So the wider the reach, it doesn't mean that the author is a better author. It gets more, but there is a certain level of trying to please more people, which I don't. Like it's, for example, the prose. There's an author, I know that she's very highly educated, sells, her books are fantastic bestsellers. But sometimes I read paragraphs and dialogue lines, and I say, she knows better. Her editor knows better. She's dumbing down. I mean, I know she knows better. I wouldn't do that. There's a certain level of the prose and the way I would write that I like, that I feel comfortable with.
Mhm.
My writing group would not let me do it. My writing group would get on my case and say, you can't do this or that. It's too simple. I respect my reader, but by that, I'm also challenging a certain level of readers who are interested in learning in a deeper book and are willing to go on a deeper journey. And yes, and my books are not fun, I must say. They are, because there's social issues, there's some tragedies, there's some sad things that happen. They are challenging emotionally. And they're not, you don't get a knee slapper when you read my books.
Right. So it sounds like those are some lessons that you've learned. Basically. So what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Uh, there was the worst advice I've ever heard given to authors is write what you know. I mean, if I wrote only what I knew at the time I wrote my first novel, which was Puppet Child, I would have had a little novella. In order to write Puppet Child, which deals with, it's about a mother fighting the legal system to save her daughter from the molestation by the father. And it's about the legal system. It's somebody compared it at that time, reviewer compared it to John Grisham. So it's not about this child sexual abuse as it is about our legal system, which I know nothing. I didn't know the difference between a state court and a federal court and whatever. And I ended up I got permission to sit in closed court because this all had to do with minors. So I got permission to sit in court and I had to learn a lot about the legal system. Yes, write about what you don't know is so much more interesting. And that I would say continues to be in every one of my books. They also take place in countries I don't know. I mean, I've been to China. under protection, so to speak, of Chinese government that followed me around. But in order to be able to write about this book, I had to interview dissidents and people outside of China, and to understand the Chinese government's mentality. I went to lectures about the US-China relationship, diplomatic, political relationship. I knew nothing about it. Yes, so that's what I find most interesting. Write what you don't know.
Okay. So that's your main piece of advice to other writers. Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that may have helped you in your career?
You have to have a writing group, a good one. It's like dating. You can have some very bad dates with people who don't know what they're talking about and will destroy you. So you have to shop around a bit and make sure that you get the right people who are supportive, but can also help, can give you constructive critiquing, rather than just try to show off, or if they don't know what they're talking about, they would cover up. But once you get a good writing group, I stayed with each one for a decade or more. Yes, I'm now off. I had to get off my writing group for the first time in about 14 years because of my book tour. And we just added new members, 3 new members, and that meant to me that I would have had to immerse myself in the works of 3 new people, not just one. Always we did one, but we had some changes and losses, so we added 3, and I realized I didn't have the time to immerse myself. But normally I give and give and give, and then when I need, I get back. I get such fabulous feedback from people who want the best for me and for my book, and are not afraid to tell me what works and what doesn't work, or ask if that's what I mean. Is that what's the intention? And so on. So that's been very helpful.
Mm-hmm. What has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
I would say sometimes as you can hear, I traveled, and for The Boy with the Star Tattoo, I traveled 5 times to France. The last time, which I couldn't, during part of the tour, the research was that Sharon discovers that she has to go to the Loire Valley, which I didn't know, Loire Valley in France. I didn't know. And it was COVID and I couldn't go. So I spoke with tour guides. I had a big map covering my entire floor, a very detailed map of that area. And with his local historians and the tour guides, 2 tour guides, we picked the various specific. I had Chateau de Valençay was my center, so I knew where that story goes. But which towns around it, and I needed specific, has to be the size and where it's located, and my book takes place in time that transportation wasn't easy, so you don't have a train going there and so on. And once I got those, I used drones to see these villages. And it did not cost me a single euro because these villages cooperated and they had videos with drone videos of those villages. So I could see, I had to look down to see where's the church, where's the plaza, where's the river, where's they always have either a mansion, a castle, a palace, or a fortress. There's something, every village in France is around one such structure. But where is it located in terms of my protagonist moving, or the character moving from point A to point B to point C? And that was interesting. But then finally, October 21, the book was mostly written when I took a trip there with my daughter, and one of those villages totally did not work. Did not, totally was wrong. I misunderstood what I saw from the air. Turns out it was an abbey. It wasn't working abbey, and there was a lot of monks filling up the village, not farmers as I'd expected. And I didn't want so many monks. I didn't. So we had to look, and she had to leave, and I ended up driving myself a stick shift. And then I had a flat tire, so I called Hertz, and Hertz comes, and instead of fixing the tire, they tore my car away and leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere without a car. So yeah, that was an adventure that I really was left very unhappy.
That wasn't your favorite adventure then.
Yeah, so that was, yeah, my daughter said she left in time. But yeah, most of them, I would say, were not as exciting as this one.
Okay. Now I have some questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Then I'm a wet noodle inside.
Okay. You're a wet noodle. I missed the last part.
Inside. I look like I'm a
Inside.
very strong person, strong woman, capable, have weathered a lot of stuff in my life, but I'm a wet noodle inside.
Okay. You were saying you're very strong. You were mentioning before a little bit about some of the things that you had done recently. Um, can you explain a little bit?
If you're referring to the wave of anti-Semitism around the world, and now in the United States, and now it's landing in the literary world,
Yes.
then yes. And I became an unexpected activist on this. It started actually with 6 weeks before the book came out. The book came out January 30th. On December 17th, 6 weeks prior, someone posted a video on TikTok, and you can tell my age, I'm not in TikTok. So, and the video calls to boycott me, to tank the book, to bomb the book, and to make sure it doesn't succeed, and that HarperCollins deplatforms me. Didn't even think of the word, me and other Jewish authors, but specifically me. And it went from TikTok into Instagram, and I was still unaware of that, what a war that began to rage against me on Instagram. And then by the time I found out, Goodreads, that's the one website where people can post reviews before a book comes out. And Amazon only allows from the day of publication, and usually, and it's known to people because you have to be an Amazon customer. They know your name, their credit card, address, there's information. And Goodreads, you can post anytime prior, and you can do it anonymously, and you don't have, and you can throw as ratings without any explanation, and they have they don't apply their own rules of anti-harassment. So while this began as a call for harassment, by that December 17th, I didn't even, just before, a few days prior, when I looked to see if there were reviews, there were 16 reviews by bloggers and reviewers who had received advanced reader's copy. But December 17th, there are dozens of 1-star, showers of 1 stars from obviously people who don't know who I am. They'd never read the book, would not have access to it. And some added all kind of nasty wording, such as Zionist, genocidal cheerleader, and everything has to do with, obviously, the war between Israel and Gaza, which I had nothing to do with, because my book ends up in 1969, and the Palestinian Charter was written in 1974. So it's not even has to do with the Palestinians' claim to the land. And anyway, it's not what I wrote about. But since then, Goodreads had not done anything about it. Readers, please flag those nasty remarks when you see them, but some would put something sounds legitimate, such as, oh, very poorly written. But we know that in December 17th, this person could not have read the book. But if people just throw a 1 star, you can't argue, because it's not even accompanied by wording. Well, lo and behold, on Instagram, when they were aware of all of this, which I was not, many people banded together to throw in 5 stars. So more dozens, greater 5 stars, but showering the book. And by the time I'm going to look at this, like, what is going on? Hundreds of non-reviews, just stars. Luckily, they brought it up to above 4 because of there's so many more 5s than 1. But most of them were not legitimate. Eventually, once the book came out, we got a lot of legitimate reviews, where most of them are very positive. Some of those 1 stars continue to come in. So that's one thing. So as a result of that, I got some coverage in the media, and as anti-Semitism has grown, my case is one that you can point to a concerted campaign rather than just somebody doesn't like a book. But this is a concerted campaign. It continues, and my book tour has been mostly within the Jewish community, mostly because, for example, JCCs, Jewish Community Centers, have literary days, and they invite authors. And I challenged the YMCAs around the country to show me their literary programs. We do not find those kind of equivalents. So it was a natural place for my book to be presented. But as the atmosphere of anti-Semitism is growing around the country, to the point that bookstores don't want to host Jewish authors, agents fire Jewish authors, libraries are afraid to give Jewish authors an event because they don't want demonstrators outside. The anti-Semitism is open and politically correct. Sometimes it's attached to the war between Israel and Gaza, which is so misunderstood and uninformed. And by the way, I would like to recommend that your bookstore puts on the front, Noah Tishby's book, Israel, the Most Misunderstood Country in the World. That should be in the front table, because it's such a good book to explain a lot. It was written before and was published during COVID, but it explains a lot of things that people don't understand. But anyway, with the anti-Semitism now very much open against Jewish authors, even though mine has been in one form, in Goodreads mostly. For other authors, it's, as I'm saying, canceled events and refusal to even publish their books that have been contracted. So I asked the Authors Guild about 10 days ago to it's time to come out with a statement against anti-Semitism, which affects Jewish authors in the literary world. The New York Times by now has written an article, the New York Post written an article. I mean, it's in the main media. I was interviewed by L'Express, the French newspaper that wrote about it. So it's now internationally known phenomena of what happens to Jewish authors in the United States. And the Authors Guild was yet to come out with a statement. So I made a big noise about it. And the letter I wrote to the Authors Guild leadership, I also made sure it appears in open channels, not stay inside. And I must say today, June 26, 2024, the Author Guild came out with a big statement against racism and prejudice and singling out authors for treatment based upon their religion, race, relationships, whatever. It's a pretty good, some of my fellow authors don't think it's enough, but I'm satisfied that now there is an official statement, because this is the atmosphere in which we authors work.
Incredible. Okay, now I have some questions about what are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for the hobbies and things that you love?
I exercise or dance every day, basically, or 6 days a week. So I wake up pretty early in the morning. I spend time with my iPad. I must say Sudoku and Words with Friends and the New York Times spelling bee and some emails. But then I go to my office, spend some time, and mid-morning, depends on the classes. I take classes, other exercise, it depends where I am, either exercise or dance. I dance jazz. So that's, you would say, passion.
Yes, yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, I used to have music here and I would dance, and I have a problem with that ceiling because I can't do too much with my arms. So that's one. Another passion is chocolate, which I don't allow myself.
You don't?
No.
Not at all?
Oh, sometimes, diet. Let me see. I have a large family. I have a husband. We have 4 married children, and we have grandchildren. So, oh my God, they can keep me busy. That's definitely. I love traveling. I love international travel. Just so I take time, and that's where the stories find me. That's why my stories each is set in a different country, not because I set it up. Here's another one. Hotel Moscow, obviously in Russia. The third daughter is in Argentina. China doll in China. Puppet Child is actually Long Island and Israel. Jerusalem Maiden is Jerusalem and Paris. So yeah, I would say that international travel definitely inspire me, but it's also understanding other cultures, not bring a preset notion of how things should be. Or, oh, in America, we do it this way. Well, maybe you can learn something from the way they do something in a different country. And that's interesting. That's interesting for me.
Okay. So what does your writing space look like? I mean, I can see that what's behind you, but what do you
Yeah.
need to have with you when you're writing or editing?
First of all, I use an outside keyboard, not computer's keyboard, because I don't know how, I can't work on that. I need it. I even travel with that. And of course, I have an outside mouse. I don't use, so even though I
Mhm.
use a laptop, I use the mouse and the keyboard outside of it. It's much more convenient. What else I need? That's it. Myself, more or less quiet. Leave me alone. Turn off the
Okay.
phone. Not be tempted to look at Words with Friends or whoever, or you know, the New York Times Queen Bee is not Queen B, spelling bee. Sometimes the letters stay in my head during the day, and I find myself coming up with a word, and I run over and I put it in on my phone. So yeah, try not to, but I don't get distracted much unless I let it, because if you're in a dream, you can't stop the dream and make a phone call and go back to the dream. So I need to completely, at the time I write, to close myself off. And I have friends who say to me, "You're never available for lunch." Right. I can't cut the middle of the day. I would have loved to have also a glass of wine, but it kills my day, my work day. So after my exercise class, which depends again what time it is, but by 11 o'clock, 11:30, I'm now back in my office and I work. So that is my schedule.
Mhm. So when you're in your trance, have you thought about recording, your tape recording instead of typing, or
No,
do you find it
no,
much
it goes
easier to take?
directly into writing. It goes directly into writing.
Hmm.
It doesn't go through the process, doesn't even seem to go through my brain, but obviously it does. It,
Obviously it
it,
does, yeah.
it's as if it comes from inside me here, from my center into the keyboard.
Ah, okay. So do you need to have any food or drink or anything with you while
I'm
you're
like a
writing?
baby with a sippy cup. I have my
Yep.
and
Okay.
or a bottle of water, but no, I may not eat for until I don't eat breakfast. I never liked breakfast, so I don't eat until maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my first bite of anything, and then it's
Wow.
hard for me to stop. But
Yeah.
but I would say I would like my ideally to have my main meal in the day served because I don't cook. So I'd like it to be served to me 3:30. My life would be perfect, but that doesn't happen.
And writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions.
No,
Um, you don't have any, huh?
no, no, I
Yeah.
don't.
Ah, okay. Now I have just two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And you can get Talia's books at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And if you send us email or call us, we can order any of the books for you. Okay. And where else can people find the books?
And I say that I really support indie bookstores. I think that I don't know yours, your particular geography, but I'm sure you are Main Street, kind of a cultural center where people come into an independent bookstore and it's a sort of a home where children learn to appreciate the written word and the pictures in the words. And I'm sure you have a little children's corners with
Yes,
books. And
two
the
rooms.
adults find something of interest to whatever is the interest. So uh, independent bookstores are so important to our culture that I support. And in my website, you always find the link to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and an independent bookstore where you enter your zip code and you find out which is the store near you, where you are. So yes, please support them. I know that Amazon has taken over the world. And I try myself not to give them all my business. If and on things like if it's shoes or something I need for my pool, I try to go to the specific companies that specialize in them. Rather, it's easier in Amazon, I must say. And delivery is faster and so on. But I do want to give the business to, if it's a Home Depot, Staples, smaller stores. I mentioned if it's a local shoe store, whatever it is, I try to give them the business, not just give everything to Amazon.
Okay.
I mean, I have to appreciate what Amazon did because I think that in total, more people buy more books in total because of that. But
Mhm.
they don't always have the best, I would say, gatekeepers in terms of what's good and what should be interesting. And that's where a bookstore like yours that you do hand selling is important. And I would like to say I'm going to mail you my bookmarks.
Great. Thank you.
So people can come and get each bookmark. The bookmark has all of my 6 books
Wonderful.
with a little bit of description so that, and then on my website and my other links.
Wonderful. Thank you. And my last question for you is how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Oh, uh, follow me. I like Facebook. I have my own my personal, and I have my author page, and I have about 10,000 people. Please email me if you go on my website, taliacarner.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter. I will not inundate you. It's maybe once a month, every 6 weeks. I send out a newsletter, but you keep in touch. I people tell me they actually wait for my newsletter. So that's a way to keep in touch. On Instagram, I'm not very active. I try to be more active now. So yeah, you can find me there. LinkedIn, I'm there only because people link to me, but I'm not looking for a job, and I have a job, except it's not a corporate job. So yes, I'm everywhere, but I'm not. I would say my website is the best way to read a lot because behind each book listed, there's additional information that could be very interesting about it.
Okay. Great. Well, that's all the questions I have for you, Talia.
Selena, thank you so
Yeah.
much. It was a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you so much, Talia Carner. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I will be expecting the bookmarks. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks.
And I will be speaking